Government drama llama ding dong talking about vets in Russia. And when I say vets, I mean specifically military veterans in Russia. Before traveling there, I was advised that it was probably safe to give money or food to people that were veterans or to the elderly, probably not children. I was told that children were likely to use it to buy paint, or sometimes their parents had them doing the begging for them, which is the whole thing in and of itself. There's lots of different documentaries out about the different orphanages and state homes for children in places like Russia and Romania. You can feel free to look those up. Many of them are sad for many reasons. Before getting too distracted, however, let's go back to discussing those military veterans. After the fall of the Soviet Union, there was a lot of issues with Russia's social safety net. The transition to a market economy in Russia has reduced most people's real incomes, especially the incomes of the poor. The sharp decline in output and manifold increases in prices have taken their heaviest toll on the more vulnerable segments of the population: the elderly or disabled, unemployed workers, workers receiving delayed or partial wages, and families with many children. Cash income for many of these groups is below the estimated sustenance level. To put that a little more in perspective, in 1991, 17 million persons, or 11.7% of the population, had income below the sustenance level. Within a year, that number increased to 44 million, or about 30% of the population. As you can see from the pie chart above, in 1993, the majority of spending was for pensions. There were multiple reasons as to why there was difficulty getting these social safety nets, such as having too many middlemen controlling things. For this, I want to specifically point out two. One, the weak financial base. Statutory payroll taxes in Russia are relatively high. However, the effective rates actually paid by the working population, are lower than the statutory rates by 20 to 35%. Basically, the workers are putting more into the tax coffers than a lot of the wealthy. The second was wasteful expenditures. Two of the extra budgetary funds, Employment Fund and Fund for Social Protection of the Population, provide wage and other subsidies to enterprises with the principal objective of maintaining employment. However, there seems to be little rationale for providing subsidies for employment that are also financed by worker social insurance contributions meant to cover unemployment. So there's already some issues, some of which look familiar. So when it comes to military vets, basically there is some pension, some medication, some mental health services, but essentially it's not enough and it's often questionable. Many military veterans are unalived from drinking, poverty, homelessness, unaliving themselves, or combination thereof of some of these things. After leaving the service, many have difficulty getting jobs due to trauma, mental issues, and other things like that, so they may end up with jobs like security, and these are not exactly high paying, even if they are in places like St. Petersburg or Moscow. Not to mention those that come out of their military service with a disability. There's also those who have disabilities after leaving the military service. Feel free to pause and read the start of this article here. Men missing their legs in camouflage clothing became a frequent sight over the next few years, and so did the sight of men moving along metro platforms on low-slung pieces of board with wheels. Russian media would deny these people were quote-unquote real veterans, saying that while they claim to have served in Chechnya or Afghanistan, they actually lost their limbs from frostbite after passing out drunk in the cold. Some, it was claimed, had been put to work by organized crime syndicate. Ukraine offers around $20,000 per limb to its wounded for prosthetics, but the Russian reality is much harsher. The wounded are often treated in substandard military hospitals as opposed to civilian facilities, which can increase the progression of complications like gangrene and make amputations more likely. Russian media has reported that 90% of amputees want to return to the front lines. While this figure should be treated with extreme caution, it is often easier for Moscow to send wounded soldiers back to the front line than support their health needs at home. As expected, the leadership in Russia is trying to put a more positive spin on all of this. One of the things that Russia is doing is offering better pay for soldiers, but let's get into that a little bit. These policies could provide the Russian regime with an ongoing base of support, bring in a new case of loyal bureaucrats, and enable President Vladimir Putin to clear the government of those he is dissatisfied with. They may be more focused on making sure that those currently in the military are more loyal to them, but let's look at previous wars. The veterans of the Soviet war in Afghanistan demonstrate how a lack of recognition and benefits created an aggrieved class. Despite involving 600,000 troops who bore the burden of an estimated 15,000 unalivings, Afghanistan initially received scant benefits unless they had been severely wounded. It was only in 1983, 4 years after the war had started, that they were awarded the status of combat veterans and the benefits that came with this. But this initial failure, coupled with the declining ability of the Soviet state to actually provide benefits, resulted in the Afghan war veteran becoming both a symbolic and physical source of destabilization. The Russian state has wasted no time extending a litany of benefits to veterans of the ongoing war in Ukraine. Many of these benefits are intended to increase recruitment, but will certainly have an impact on whether veterans become a liability or an asset. What are they offering? Well, free land, cash payments, preferential tax status, favorable loans, and priority in access to medical care. A lot of the things that they're currently offering aren't too dissimilar from the GI Bill in the United States after World War II. But one way to get people to have loyalty and support for your regime is to give them things that they wouldn't have had otherwise. The access to discounted loans and heavily subsidized college education proved integral in the expansion of the middle class, which formed a cornerstone of Cold War America's economic prosperity. Russia's programs are fulfilling a similar function, but in a different fashion. While Russian veteran benefits do include educational and housing benefits, lavish pay may play the most important role in securing the loyalty and political reliability of veterans. What about veterans from the Chechen Wars? Although the history of the Soviet Union demonstrates that lost wars lead to the social abandonment of veterans as much as victorious wars, the fate of disabled veterans seems to be conditioned by the cultural heritage of the Soviet period, which glorifies a muscular body and favors work capacity as a criterion for citizenship. In this article, the author states that he was struck by the fact that veterans presented their experience in the Russian army in terms of violence directed at them by the military institution. They described several types of violence, and their testimonies are corroborated by many other accounts published in recent years. I highly recommend reading the entire article and the interviews. One of the issues pointed out is that institutional violence, such as commanders giving wrong orders, is highlighted throughout the following extract. Things such as sending them out with minimal training, giving them defective weapons, or having them under the influence of substances. The medical facilities were also traumatic due to things like medical negligence. Or in some cases, there's also stories where Russia abandoned some of their forces, then put much of the medical and mental health was placed on either families or charitable organizations. In 2003, the All Russia Organization of Invalids of Afghanistan, joined also by Chechen veterans, conducted a survey among its members and found that 46% of them have an income only sufficient to meet basic needs. 90.7% have a difficult time finding a job, and nearly 90% have no professional qualification for use in civilian life. It also doesn't help that there's a culture of heroism in Russia, again, similar to the US. This model was born inside the military institution. It is this masculine ideal that has endured throughout the Soviet period to the present day. It emphasizes virility, force, physical endurance, sacrifice, and courage. In Russia, as in Western Europe, virility is characterized by the contemplation of the body as the physical expression of superior moral qualities. This is the opposite image to that presented by a disabled war veteran. When one of the people in the article was questioned about why Russia refuses to care for the disabled veterans, he answered, "I don't think it is the case only for Russia, and I don't think it is a weakness. Why does Russian state refuse to care about us? Because they don't want to, that's why. Maybe we are not indispensable. To Yuri Ivanovich, apparently we are useful, that's why he accepted us. But for the state it is not the case. They probably see us as the scum of society." Although renewed and continuous violence toward veterans is observable throughout the Soviet period from World War II to Chechnya, disabled veterans seem to be specifically targeted for rejection, abandonment, and disengagement. Because they cannot be part of the production process due to their diminished work capacity, the debt of the Rodina Mat is reversed. The protective Rodina Mat becomes a rejecting mother. The great sacrifice of body and health made by disabled veterans is not worthy of state gratitude. Fighting against another form of violence, social marginalization, remains their last battle. This current regime seems hell-bent on making people suffer. We need to continue to help try and improve the lives of marginalized groups such as disabled and veterans, because it will get worse for everybody if we don't help those who need it the most.